Imagine stepping in to the incredibly rigid, perfectly quiet halls of a classical music conservatory in the late 1950s. You hear the sharp, unforgiving click of metronomes.
Oh, yeah. Just that heavy atmosphere of pure discipline.
Exactly. Pristine sheet music stacked on heavy wooden stands. You feel the expectation and honestly a terrifying lack of margin for error.
Right.
And you would never, in a million years, look around that intensely serious room and expect it to forge a man who would one day play piano in Central Park, let alone in front of 400,000 screaming people.
While dressed head to toe as Donald Duck, no less.
Right. I mean, it is the ultimate contradiction.
It really is. On one hand, you have this image of classical precision, a world where every single note is dictated by history. And on the other, you have the absolute undisputed definition of flamboyant, unpredictable rock and roll excess.
And that contradiction is exactly why we are here today. We are taking a massive stack of historical and biographical material and distilling it down for you, the listener.
Because our mission here isn't just to recite a list of chart-topping hits. I mean, you probably already know the melodies by heart anyway.
Oh, for sure. What we are really doing is unpacking the profound duality of one of the best-selling artists of all time. We want to understand how a shy, classically trained piano prodigy named Reginald Kenneth Dwight, who was raised in a very strict home, transformed into the global icon we know as Sir Elton John.
Yeah, and perhaps even more importantly, how overcoming his absolute darkest personal demons forged his legacy, not just as a musician, but as a titan of philanthropy.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So, to really grasp the sheer scale of the Elton John persona, you have to understand the constraint that necessitated it in the first place.
Right, the origin story.
Exactly. We have to start in Penner, Middlesex, in 1947. Reggie Dwight was raised in a council house, and his childhood was basically defined by tension.
Yeah, reading the source material is pretty heavy.
It is. His father was a squadron leader in the Royal Air Force, and it's clear his dad wanted a very conventional, stable, quiet life for his son. In fact, he actively pushed for Reggie to pursue a career in banking.
Which is almost comical to think about now.
I know, right?
Just imagine Elton John sitting behind a gray desk approving loan applications.
In a bedazzled suit.
Right. But, it wasn't a funny situation at the time at all. His father was largely absent due to his military service, and when he was home, the environment was incredibly hostile.
Yes, his parents argued vehemently.
And you can imagine the psychological toll that takes on a sensitive, observant kid. Home wasn't a sanctuary for him, it was a minefield.
Exactly. That domestic tension is a crucial psychological baseline for everything that comes later. When his parents finally divorced when he was 14, it was less of a tragedy and more of a release valve.
A huge relief.
Totally. He was supported by his free-spirited mother and his new stepfather, a local painter named Fred Fairbrother. And Elton actually affectionately called him Durf.
Which is just Fred spelled backwards, right?
Yep. Durf stepped in and became the supportive, encouraging father figure that Reggie desperately needed.
And during all this domestic chaos, this kid is somehow developing into a staggering musical prodigy. I mean, the stories from his early childhood sound like myths, but they are fully documented.
Oh, the talent was unreal.
As a young boy, he hears the Skater's Waltz playing in the background, just on the radio, and walks over to the piano and plays it entirely by ear.
Wow.
And by age 11, he wins a junior scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music. Instructors there noted that he could hear a complex 4-page handle piece for the very first time and just instantly play it back flawlessly, like a human gramophone record.
But that kind of genius is ice-helping, And here is where you see the first real sparks of that legendary rebellious streak.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly the perfect student.
Not at all. Despite this profound, almost alien level of classical talent, he deeply resented the academy. The rigidity of it all just completely stifled him. He wasn't a diligent student practicing his scales. He would actually frequently skip his Saturday classes just to ride around aimlessly on the London Underground. He didn't want to be Mozart. He just wanted to play rock and roll.
He wanted the noise and the freedom. So at age 15, he starts playing pub piano at the Northwood Hills Hotel. He eventually forms a band called Bluesology, and this is the exact moment the alter ego is born.
The big shift.
Yeah, Reggie Dwight sheds his skin and legally changes his name to Elton Hercules John. Now, I know the first and last names are direct homages to his Bluesology bandmates Elton Dean and Long John Baldry. But I have to ask about the middle name.
Hercules.
Yeah, Hercules. When I first read that, my immediate instinct was that it was a deliberate nod to the Greek god of strength. a way for a shy kid to project power. Was it just brilliant self-mythologizing?
You would absolutely think so, given the larger-than-life, indestructible persona he was trying to build. But the reality is so much weirder and honestly so much more revealing.
Okay,
He actually named himself after a horse.
Wait, really? A horse?
Specifically, a horse pulling a cart in the British sitcom Steptoe and Son, which he was a massive fan of at the time.
A sitcom horse.
Yeah.
That completely undercuts the majesty of it, but in the absolute best way possible.
It really perfectly captures his quirky, deeply British sense of humor. Even when reinventing his entire identity and trying to build this impenetrable armor of rock stardom, he just couldn't resist a deeply self-deprecating inside joke.
I love that so much. So Elton John now officially exists, but an alter ego needs a voice.
Right.
And in 1967, an A&R manager named Ray Williams hands Elton a literal unopened envelope. Inside that envelope are lyrics written by a guy named Bernie Taupin, a complete stranger who had answered the exact same talent ad in a music paper that Elton had.
The famous ad.
Yeah. Elton opens the envelope, reads the words, and the trajectory of popular music is permanently altered.
And what's fascinating here is the mechanics of their legendary songwriting process. They practically never write in the same room.
Which is wild for a duo that successful.
It is. It's the creative equivalent of parallel play. Bernie Taupin will sit down and write a batch of lyrics, often in under an hour. He hands the pages to Elton. Elton takes those lyrics, sits at the piano, and writes the melody and chord structure, usually in about half an hour.
And if Elton can't figure out the music quickly, the lyrics are literally tossed in the bin. They don't agonize over it at all.
Yeah.
They don't spend 3 weeks in a studio screaming at each other about a bridge or a chorus. It's just a magical assembly line. But beyond the speed, think about the psychology of why this works so perfectly. By never being in the same room, they completely remove the ego from the equation.
That's a great point.
Bernie isn't hovering over the piano telling Elton how to play, and Elton isn't analyzing Benny's poetry line by line.
And that separation of powers is exactly why it survived. Over 50 years. More than 30 albums.
That longevity is insane.
Right. In an industry literally defined by bitter, litigious, creative breakups. I mean, think of the Beatles or Pink Floyd. Elton and Bernie have publicly claimed to never, ever have had a professional or personal argument.
That is just unheard of.
Complete creative separation somehow resulted in perfect harmony.
And you really cannot argue with the results. By 1970, your song breaks through. He plays a now legendary U.S. debut at the Dynamo in Los Angeles, and the rocket ship officially leaves the atmosphere.
We are talking about a level of market dominance that is difficult to fully comprehend today.
Oh, totally.
Between 1972 and 1975, he achieved 7 consecutive #1 albums in the United States. That was a feat that had never been accomplished in the history of the Billboard charts prior to that moment.
Just to put into perspective what kind of commodity he became, you guys.
Mm.
In 1974, MCA Records took out a $25 million insurance policy on his life.
Which was a staggering amount of money back then.
Right. When a corporation values your literal breathing body at $25 million in 1974 money, you sort of stop being a human being to them. You become a walking economy. And how do you cope with that?
You hide.
Exactly, you hide. With that stratospheric fame came the stage persona. The $5,000 glasses that spelled his name in lights, dressing up as the Statue of Liberty, or Mozart, or, as we mentioned right at the top, playing that 1980 Central Park concert to 400,000 people wearing a massive Donald Duck costume.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you might look at those outfits in the archival footage and just see the absolute peak of 1970s rock excess. You might think it was just a brilliant, cynical marketing gimmick to stand out in an era of really flashy rock stars.
Which would be the logical assumption.
Sure, but Elton himself has explicitly stated that those wild costume performances were his way of finally letting go after a highly restrictive, emotionally stunted childhood.
Ah, so the feathers, the giant glasses, the outrageous platform boots. It wasn't just theater. It was psychological armor.
Precisely.
Reggie Dwight was a shy, insecure boy who felt out of place and deeply unloved by his father. But Elton John, wrapped in sequins in a Donald Duck suit, was untouchable. The costume allowed him to step completely out of his own vulnerability.
Exactly, but the fundamental problem with armor is that it is incredibly heavy, and eventually you have to take it off. Escaping your childhood trauma isn't as simple as just putting on a costume.
No, it never is.
By 1975, during a massive, exhausting Elton Week celebration in Los Angeles, the armor finally cracks. He suffers a severe cocaine overdose. And concurrently, he's battling bulimia. The extreme heights of the 1970s inevitably led to a profound, life-threatening crash.
And his personal life during this era heavily reflects that immense internal chaos. He's bouncing between relationships, desperately looking for a stabilizing force, but completely unable to maintain one.
It was a really dark period.
In the late 1960s, he was briefly engaged to a woman named Linda Woodrow. And actually, as a testament to his underlying character, the sources note he stepped in to help her financially 50 years later.
Wow, that's really something.
But back then, the engagement fell apart. He then had a highly volatile 5-year romantic and professional relationship with his manager, John Reed.
The search for identity was basically tearing him apart. I mean, he publicly came out as bisexual in a 1976 interview, which was highly controversial at the time.
Incredibly risky back then.
But the internal struggle didn't end there. In 1984, in what many saw as a desperate attempt to find normalcy, he married a German recording engineer named Renate Blauel. It was a tragic situation for both of them.
Yeah, that was heartbreaking to read about.
The marriage ended 4 years later and included a devastating suicide attempt by Blauel on their honeymoon. He was a gay man trying to force himself into a heteronormative box while under the absolute brightest spotlight on Earth. The pressure was unimaginable. It wasn't until 1992 that he finally stated he was completely comfortable being a gay man.
So he reached his absolute breaking point in the late 1980s. But here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. Because his path to sobriety in 1990 wasn't just a standard rock star goes to rehab story.
Not at all.
It was triggered by two very specific, very unexpected catalysts that pierced right through all that armor. A teenager and a song.
Yes. The first catalyst was a boy named Ryan White. Ryan was a teenage hemophiliac in Indiana who contracted AIDS through a contaminated blood transfusion.
Such a tragic story.
Truly. He became a national poster child for HIV and AIDS education after being expelled from his middle school due to his infection. Elton befriended him and actually spent a significant amount of time with Ryan's family before the boy's tragic death in 1990.
You just have to imagine the stark contrast there. Elton John, a man with limitless wealth and resources, actively destroying himself in Hollywood hotel rooms, suddenly sitting in a modest home in Indiana with a teenager who was fighting with unimaginable grace just to stay alive.
It shattered him, but in the best way possible. Elton later stated plainly that if it weren't for the White family, he would probably be dead.
Wow.
Seeing their dignity in the face of such profound, unfair tragedy forced him to look in the mirror at his own destructive, entitled behavior. He realized he was wasting the very life that Ryan was begging to keep.
The second catalyst was music itself. Not his own music, but a 1986 duet by Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel called Don't Give Up.
Yeah, Elton credits a very specific vocal delivery by Kate Bush in that song for playing a major part in his rebirth. The lyric is simple, but devastatingly empathetic. She sings, "Rest your head, you worry too much, it's gonna be all right."
It's a beautiful line.
He has stated on the record that hearing that specific song with that specific message of unconditional comfort helped save his life.
I think that's something you can probably relate to even without the whole rock star context. It reminds us that sometimes salvation doesn't come from sheer grinding willpower alone. It comes from outside ourselves.
Exactly.
It comes through the profound empathy of a stranger's family or the exact right lyric hitting you at the exact right moment when you're finally ready to hear it.
It is a profound testament to the power of art and human connection. He absorbed the empathy he received from Ryan White and from Kate Bush, and it fundamentally rewired him. He finally got sober in 1990.
And there is this beautiful, almost poetic symmetry to the second half of his life. Because art and a tragic illness saved him from himself. So what does he do with his second chance? He dedicates the rest of his life to saving others from that exact same illness.
The transformation from a self-destructive rock star to a global humanitarian is really striking. Following the deaths of Ryan White and then his close friend Freddie Mercury in 1991, he channeled all his grief and newfound clarity into action.
He didn't just write a check, he built an institution.
Right. He established the Elton John AIDS Foundation in 1992. And to date, that foundation has raised over $600 million globally to combat the disease, fund research, and fight the stigma.
He became a pillar of strength, not just for the marginalized, but for the entire world. We saw this on an unprecedented global scale in 1997. Within just a few months, he endured the devastating murders of his close friend Gianni Versace, and then the sudden, shocking death of Princess Diana.
Such a heavy year.
In the midst of that global mourning, he asked Bernie Taupin to rewrite the lyrics to Candle in the Wind. His performance at Diana's funeral was watched by billions of people. That single sold 33 million copies, becoming the best-selling chart single of all time. He took the world's grief and gave it a melody.
And as he became a stabilizing force in the world, his personal life finally found the deep, quiet stability he had lacked since he was a little boy in Pinner.
Full circle.
He entered a civil partnership in 2005 and later legally married filmmaker David Furnish in 2014. Together, they have 2 sons via surrogacy. The man who grew up in a fractured, angry home finally built a solid, loving one.
And professionally, he just refuses to slow down. In 2024, he achieved EGOT status,
That is an incredibly rare club.
winning an Emmy for his Dodger Stadium farewell special, adding to his Oscars, Grammys, and Tony Awards. He also became the first solo artist ever to have UK top 10 singles across 6 different decades.
Which brings us to his highly active modern era. We see a man who remains a fiercely vocal and complex public figure. He refuses to be easily categorized.
Right.
For instance, the sources note he was heavily active in politics in 2024. He campaigned for Joe Biden in the U.S. and publicly endorsed Labour leader Keir Starmer in the U.K.
Right. He threw his considerable cultural weight behind them. But it's interesting because the text shows his loyalties are entirely issue-based. We're just looking at the facts here, not taking any political side. But he doesn't just blindly follow a party line.
Exactly, because by early 2025, he fiercely and publicly clashed with that exact same UK Labour government.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he stated he felt deeply betrayed over their legislative plans to exempt AI technology firms from certain copyright laws. He really stepped up as a legacy artist defending intellectual property.
Which makes sense for a songwriter.
Right. And furthermore, in late 2024, he took a very firm stance against the legalization of cannabis.
Which, might surprise a lot of people given his rock and roll pedigree. Again, we're not endorsing or criticizing the stance, just conveying what the material says.
Totally. And he views it strictly through the lens of his own trauma. He cited his severe past struggles with addiction, calling the push for cannabis legalization one of the greatest mistakes of our time. He is entirely unafraid to speak his mind or upset his own fan base, regardless of where the opinion falls on the political spectrum.
Well, he has certainly earned the right to his convictions. But beyond his outspokenness, we really have to look at his sheer physical resilience in these recent years.
It's unbelievable.
In 2023, he completed the Farewell Yellow Brick Road Tour, which at the time became the highest-grossing tour in the history of music. Then, in late 2024, he revealed some incredibly tough health news. A severe eye infection left him completely blind in his right eye, with only limited compromised vision in his left.
And a diagnosis of severe vision loss would permanently sideline almost anyone, especially an artist in their late 70s who had just finished a grueling farewell tour. But his drive is seemingly endless.
He just keeps going.
Despite the physical limitations, he made a surprise piano performance at the New York Film Festival in October 2024. And incredibly, exactly a year later, in October 2025, he was back on a massive stage, playing to over 70,000 people at the Singapore Grand Prix.
It's astounding. You really can't keep him away from the piano. And crucially, he doesn't just sit back and rest on a legendary back catalog of hits from the 70s and 80s.
And this raises an important question about how creative minds age. Elton John's relevance today isn't just driven by pure nostalgia. He actively, hungrily seeks out collaborations with young, cutting-edge artists, people like Lorde, Billie Eilish, and Dua Lipa.
He's always listening to what's new.
He even hosts a radio show specifically to champion new music from unknown bands. He has explicitly said that listening to and working with young artists is what keeps his own mind sharp. He proves definitively that staying endlessly curious is the ultimate antidote to aging.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's look back at this incredible arc we've explored today. We started with Reggie Dwight, a rigidly constrained, brilliant piano prodigy who was terrified of his father and just wanted to break free and play rock music.
Yeah.
We saw him strap on the heavy feathered armor of his alter ego, Elton John, riding a rocket ship of unprecedented thumb while running desperately from his own internal demons, which led to a catastrophic physical and emotional crash.
And then we witnessed his profound rebirth. A rebirth sparked not by industry handlers, but by the kindness of a grieving family in Indiana and the empathetic lyrics of a pop song.
So true.
From there, he transformed into a grounded, philanthropic powerhouse. He achieved the rare EGOT, built a beautiful, stable family, and outlasted nearly all of his peers, all while keeping his ears wide open to the next generation of sound.
It really makes you think about the butterfly effect in our own lives, the tiny, seemingly insignificant moments that change the entire course of a life. Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Think about this. Elton John's entire monumental career, the 300 million records sold, the $600 million raised for AIDS research, the endless, unforgettable melodies that have soundtracked weddings and funerals for half a century.
All of it.
All of it. The entire Elton John universe was ignited by a random, unopened envelope of lyrics from a total stranger. It makes you wonder, what unopened envelopes, literal or metaphorical, are sitting on your desk right now just waiting for you to add the music?
A powerful question to carry with you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep listening, and we'll see you next time.